Happy Tuesday, everybody. My name is Matthias Berninger. I work at Bayer, a German company that is mainly operating in the health and the nutrition space. And I am leading the sustainability, the public affairs, and the science strategy team for the company. I'm very honored to be here today and look forward to a successful Economist event. You've heard a lot about the planetary boundaries, which have been introduced not very long ago by a team around the researcher of Johan Rockström, who also talks about the climate emergency at this moment in time. What I want to share with you is Bayer's impact in this space. So we are a company with a very large impact in the ag value chain. And if you look at the ag value chain, today representing roughly 25% of all carbon emissions, you easily can see that a company like Bayer with the value chain influences roughly the same emissions, 6.25% a country like India has. So value chains really matter. Since you see a picture of drought in the back, you will also appreciate that agriculture is a huge consumer of and depending on fresh water. The Bayer value chain almost depends on 20% of the fresh water that is currently used by humans. So things got much more serious in recent years, and I think business sustainability strategies need to really take on the responsibility that comes with their footprint across value chains. What you see on this slide is basically a shift that is happening everywhere in decarbonization. I've used this slide to just explain what it means for a company to be on a 1.5 degree path or to be in line with what has been decided by governments in Paris when people agreed to the Paris Agreement. Both the reductions within the 1.5 degree path by 2030, as well as the path to net zero emissions by 2050, are a very challenging topic for all companies. Decarbonization doesn't come easy. We have decided to align ourselves with the Science Based Target Initiative, and we are also part of the business ambition for 1.5 degrees, which basically requires company to do what is possible, not what is convenient when it comes to absolute carbon reductions. A big topic, generally speaking, is what does net zero really mean? McKinsey has done great work on the math behind climate change. I stole one of their slides here. It basically shows that the decarbonization path has two elements. The first element is we have to reduce carbon emissions, and we have to do that pretty drastically in the next couple of years, dare I say by the end of this decade. But we also need to look at ways to remove carbon out of the atmosphere. So that is basically the negative emissions or carbon removals. The decision whether that needs to happen, I think, is a done deal. We have seen governments from Asia all the way to most recently in April, the United States, committing to net zero targets by mid of this century. So for business, the question is no longer if, but how to get there. And therefore, I believe that decarbonization will be a core element of all business strategies going forward, at least of business strategies when businesses have a goal to be still around by mid of the century. And in order to get that right, companies need to decide how they're going to deal with sustainability from a strategic perspective. We at Bayer had a very intensive conversation about that in 2018, 2019, and we looked at four fundamental choices to do that. And they are depicted on the slide you can see right now. One approach is a shareholder maximizer approach, which basically says, I give a shit about sustainability. I just want to make money. And yes, maybe I need to communicate a bit about sustainability because otherwise I get too much public pressure. The second strategic kind of frame is the one of a corporate contributor. It's what you see in the CSR space. your financial targets and your business strategy is still fairly independent of sustainability. However, you are doing meaningful things that you also present in anecdotes in your sustainability reports. The third pillar is the pillar of the impact generator. In that one, the sustainability strategy and the business strategy are one of the same. This is where Bayer landed, and I come back to that in a minute. The fourth one is also interesting. Danone is an example of a company in that space. It's the B Corp movement of social innovators, where you basically say, well, in many ways, what I'm doing in sustainability is more important than the success of my business. I personally am a bit skeptical whether the B Corp model will be long-term sustainable. I also don't have kind of any bad feelings talking confidently about that Bayer wants to make money by solving some of the biggest sustainability challenges around the world. And therefore, I feel really bringing sustainability in the business strategy is the way to go, at least for companies like Bayer, who, as I initially indicated, have such a huge systemic impact and such an important role in helping the world to grow within planetary boundaries and to secure what you could call a safe space for humanity whilst respecting the planetary boundaries. So for us, and I think for every company, a clear decision of where you want to play in sustainability is the starting point of your strategy. What have we committed to change? I think as a company, we have decided we want to help a significant larger number of people to thrive, and we have to and want to decrease our ecological footprint, and that not only with regard to what we directly control, and also not only with regard to what is in our supplier base, but also across our whole value chain. That is a big ask for a business that is operating in complex spaces. We also have decided that true sustainability strategies need to address both the social and people aspects as well as the ecological aspects. So focusing only on decarbonization was not an option for us. In our vision of health for all, hunger for none, the two important words are the all and the none. Because what we are trying to say is we need to reach more people. For example, we need to increase access to medicines, and we need to reduce the challenges related to access to food, which usually translate into famine and hunger. And there I predict, based on what I see in global agricultural markets, the number of people not being able to afford sufficient nutrition is again on the rise, and we have to do something about it. When you do that, and when you want to be an impact generator, you need to be able to measure your impact. So that's why in our strategy, the important question was, how can we set targets that are meaningful, that are, of course, also achievable, but that make a huge difference in people's lives? And how can we work on making those targets also transparent to our auditors, who are external stakeholders who, of course, measure our financial reports and check against what we are reporting with huge rigor. How can we apply a similar rigor on sustainability topics? I think it's easy on carbon. And I believe that the Science Based Target Initiative is an excellent framework of harmonizing carbon reduction activities of companies across long value chains. In the social space, it's a bit harder. We said we want to reach 100 million smallholder farmers. We want to make sure that they can lift themselves out of extreme poverty. We want to reach 100 million women and provide them access to family planning. The current global gap is in the neighborhood of 220 million women who don't have access to family planning. And we want to reach, which I think is also very important, 100 million people with access to everyday health and to medicine. what we are seeing in the COVID pandemic is that the access to health is a huge, huge challenge. But the reality is it was a challenge well before the pandemic started. If I had to choose one thing I would prioritize in delivering against the SDGs as the United Nations, it would be access to family planning. I think it's the single biggest investment in global development. It's one of the most successful ones, and it's also proven to be the one that helps more girls and women to charge their future with much better education. So access to family planning is a big one, and I'm quite happy that in the United States, we also see much more attention to that topic in USAID since the change of government. It's the single biggest thing we should do, and it's one of the SDGs everybody nods, and then people don't really act on it. But of course, we need to look at all of them in combination. I spoke about carbon on the environmental side, but a company like Bayer that operates in the crop protection space needs to address the biodiversity challenge, which has been almost on eye level with the climate crisis in 1992 during the UN conference on Rio, but since then has lost a bit its relevance in the public debate. It has not lost its relevance in the reality. So it's more a perception challenge, and we need to address the biodiversity crisis. We need to stop the loss of nature around the world in order to be able to deliver against our climate change targets, but also in order to ensure a safe space for humanity. The pandemic brought that to attention. The loss of pollinators in some parts of the world brings that to attention. The soil loss around the world is another concerning topic here. So our goal is that we have very clear, measurable targets in that space as well. I talked a bit about targets. Let me share one of the favorite quotes that I believe in and that we have established also in our strategy at Bayer. It's Upton Sinclair's quote that says, "It's really difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on not understanding it." So one of the things I look at when I look at sustainability strategies is how is management incentivized for delivering against those strategies. In the case of Bayer, 20% of the long-term incentives for our top management depend on delivering the sustainability strategy. So while I believe that incentivization doesn't solve the problem, I certainly believe that it makes it much easier for business leadership teams to prioritize sustainability aspects over other aspects when it comes to making trade-offs. And one of the strong forces of progress around the world are those business leadership teams that on different hierarchy levels are really, really strong in balancing conflicting KPIs. And we help our leadership teams by setting a clear set of targets that are geared towards 2030, but will basically be measured on an annual basis and will inform our 4-year payout cycles for incentives. So that's a really big one that I believe needs to be a necessary, of course not sufficient, ingredient of sustainability strategies. The other thing I look at when I look at whether companies are really focusing on sustainability is what their future looks like. So we need to look at innovation budgets. The 50 largest companies around the world invest some $350 billion annually in research and development. Bayer is kind of in the middle of the pack with a budget of roughly $6 billion in the space. And the question is, to what extent is the future you are inventing solving the problems we are talking about here? On this picture, you see one of those innovations in agriculture. It's a new variety of corn that is simply much shorter than the corn that is traditionally growing as one of the most important crops in agriculture today. The benefits: it's more resilient against climate change, both against droughts, but most importantly against storms. The benefits: it has a deeper root system, so it can capture more carbon out of the air, and it requires less fertilizer. So the fertilizer related carbon emissions, which are really a huge problem in agriculture, are reduced as well. For me, the single biggest benefit, however, is I need 20% less land to produce the same amount of corn. If we want to protect nature, we need solutions that allow to produce what is globally demanded on less land. Just one figure to illustrate: China held a world record in importing grains in September 2015. 4.1 million tons of grains being imported. The new record of January 2021 is 6 million tons of grains imported in one single month. And this is only going to go to continue. And with extreme weather events putting more challenges on farmers to be resilient and grow crops, and increasing demand of a growing and more affluent world population, innovations like this are important. And I think generally for companies to focus on innovation is a really important point that I want to make. If you want to see whether a company is really successful in the sustainability space, focus on their R&D budgets and not on their sustainability reports is, I guess, want to leave you with as a takeaway. Let's go to this interplay between business and government, and let me close with that. I believe if business doesn't do the right thing, governments often will do the wrong thing. What we need to do is we need to get to a place where four things move in the same direction. And I stole this insight from an author, Andrew McAfee, who wrote a book that is called More from Less. And the beauty of his framework is he believes that four things need to move in the same direction. He calls that the four horsemen of optimism. We need to have business to be willing to invest in sustainability. We need to have innovation that helps us to solve future problems. The short corn example you saw is possible as a result of the bio-revolution, which also brought us the vaccines. So it's this interplay of biology and computing power. It's where genomics, artificial intelligence, and the ability to edit genes create the century of biology. So innovation, really important. The third one is that governments and regulators need to move in the same direction. And the fourth is participation. When I look at the situation in the United States, I'm not worried about innovation. I can't see a country that is more open for companies investing in innovation. We now also have a government that moves in the right direction. And of course, we see more and more businesses deciding to invest. The challenge in the United States at the moment is participation. The biggest problem in the United States is that Republicans don't support the climate agenda. So the Green Deal in the United States really needs to become purple. We need to win over both political parties to support ambitious investments in the transition. When you compare that to Europe, what you see in Europe is that one of the main challenges in Europe is actually the focus on innovation. I think Europe needs to be much more embracing of innovation than they are today in order to really achieve successful decarbonization. Decarbonization without industrialization only gets us deindustrialization. So it really doesn't help. So my hope is that we get all four forces to move in the same direction. And I do believe that the problems we are addressing here are so humongous, very old-fashioned, that business that does the right thing will thrive in this new environment. And we are at a point of no return. Let me close by saying that the European Union decided to remove 1 billion tons of carbon by 2030. Walmart made the very same commitment a few months earlier. 1 billion tons removal out of their value chain by 2030. I think that is possible, and that drives my optimism. And I thank you very much for listening to me today.